Hi, guys, and welcome to the ADHD Unfiltered Podcast. This is our podcast with me, Emma, and my co host,
Cherry, hi.
Hi. And our podcast is all about parenthood in ADHD. It's about just everything from rejection sensitivity to overspending and everything in between, all the experiences. So there will be excuse me, I can't speak. It's 9 o'clock at night. There'll be something for everyone. And we hope that you enjoy it and feel comforted and just feel like you're not alone, because we know how that feels. And our
Absolutely.
topic today is going to be ADHD tax and precisely what that actually is. We hear a lot about it, and actually, so many of us struggle with this, and it's such an interesting topic. So, we're going to delve in. I'll
Yeah.
just start by explaining briefly what it actually is. And it's not a real tax that we get money out of our accounts taken every month from the government just for being ADHD, but it's more so a reaction and a response to how difficult we find life with ADHD at times, the extra effort, the resources, the money that we put into things and don't necessarily get a return out of. So this is like, excessive spending, forgetting to return things, all of that. It's basically a result of the choices that we make, and it can really become quite a problem. So we're going to discuss that today.
Yes, absolutely. And with ADHD tax, it's actually been found that it translates to some very real financial consequences as well. So literally the symptoms and difficulties of ADHD do have financial consequences, as many of you might be aware as well. So that's also why it's been found, several studies actually have found, that people with ADHD compared to non-ADHD people are in poorer financial situations and exhibit difficulties with financial decision-making. They also exhibit poorer financial competency and capacity, are more financially dependent on family members, and earn less and attain lower socioeconomic standing over their lifetimes.
Wow.
Yeah. So these are several studies that have found literally that.
And it makes so much sense, because it's like, listening to that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that explains my life. I mean, the amount of money I've had to borrow off parents or even friends at times, not so much anymore. I have kind of learnt to budget better, but in my early adulthood, that was really quite a problem. I felt so shameful for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Same for me. And I mean, as you said as well before, ADHD tax obviously isn't just collected in money alone,
No.
but also other costs associated with ADHD, like the constant guilt and shame, compromised relationships, poor self-esteem, etc., etc.
Yeah, it's like it's a whole bag of goodies for us, essentially. It's like, I do sometimes feel like, we don't have it easy. And the fact that so many of us still manage to have good lives and make it work is a credit to us and our brains, because we really don't have, like, the odds are against us, essentially, with the way that our brain works in society. And things like this, if you don't have ADHD, you just won't get it. You'll think, well, that's silly. You can easily avoid doing that. You really can't.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly where a lot of the issues lie, and where society still has to become better in supporting people who are neurodiverse.
Yes, so true. There is, I would say, there's barely any support, especially in the UK. I can't say for other
No.
countries, of course, but there just doesn't seem to be, even therapy and counselling. There is very limited support out there just for neurodivergent people specifically. And that is, it's scary.
Absolutely. I find, like, doctors, GPs, etc., they will tell you, oh, go to therapy, which is, great, fine.
Yeah.
But the problem is many therapists aren't specialized in neurodiversity.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it then really tricky, because some of the symptoms and difficulties that you face are very neurodiverse, and your
Yes.
brain literally works differently. So a lot of the therapies are literally just kind of structured in a way that works for neurotypical people, but might not necessarily work for neurodivergent people. It
Yes.
might, but
It might, and that's the thing.
yeah,
It
yeah,
really depends on the therapist, doesn't it? I mean,
exactly. I just
I've
want to
actually
say
had
you
some
have
that make
to.
it worse.
Yes, absolutely. So I've had some therapies where I was like, God, I felt worse every single time. And then I had
Yeah.
some therapists where it was like, actually, this is really, really helpful. So,
Yes.
but that was a very specialist therapist. So you could really see that they were just, I think they were more experienced and
Yeah.
probably had also worked with some neurodiverse people before,
Yeah.
despite that wasn't their expertise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's another example of ADHD tax, is going through so many different therapists, especially if you're paying for it. That's things
Yeah.
that I've done where I've gone into self-help mode.
Mhm.
And as an ADHD, we get quite hyperfixated on these things and quite impulsive. And I've spent so much money on self-help tools that I've never used because they just didn't work properly, or they weren't right for me. And it's another form of just putting so much money out with the intention of it bringing you a positive outcome, and inevitably it just becomes a cycle of another thing left in the drawer that you're not going to deal with or do
Yeah.
anything with.
Literally.
And I think that's, for me, I think spending and money is the biggest problem that I have had in my adult life. And the thought of all the money that I've wasted on stuff that I haven't returned, like things that were too
Oh,
big or
God.
too small. I've
Yeah.
got a coat hanging up right now that's got the tag on it still from probably about 2020. It's definitely 2020 era. And all I had to do was just put it in a bag and send it back. And I didn't. And now every time I look at it, I'm like, I really should do something about that, even if I just sold it on Marketplace or something. But I won't. And that was, £40. It's not cheap.
I could literally, if I gave you a house tour right now, I could point out an item in every single room probably that I should have returned.
Yes.
Like a minimum of one item. Like
It's awful.
I used to have like Amazon packages like next to the door of things like that I bought wrong. So for example,
Yeah.
we've gone through phases of trying to like get new curtains, and we obviously got the wrong size because,
Yeah.
who measures them beforehand, right?
Exactly. It's just a random guess. You'll be all right.
Exactly. And then, well, obviously they didn't fit. They were way too short. And we wanted to send them back, and obviously we didn't. They just like sat next to the front door for, I think, probably half a year. And
what do you think it is that makes us not do it? Because I can't really give you a definite answer. I don't really understand the psychology of why I don't. I just find it overwhelming.
I think that's exactly it. Actually, if you think about the difficulties that are often associated with ADHD, is executive dysfunction is a big one.
Yes.
And with executive dysfunction, executive dysfunction is basically accountable for the overwhelm a lot of the times, because the executive skills set in your brain is literally there to sort through all the different thoughts that you have in your brain, all the different tasks. It's like a task manager that does it automatically, or should do it automatically.
Should do.
And then it sorts it through priorities, and then once it's got it through priorities, it'll automatically think of all the steps involved and set a structure to those tasks, and then it'll make you actually initiate the tasks and carry them out until you're finished with them. And then after that, it'll make you review of how you did the tasks, and if there's any behaviors that you ought to change, whether that's emotional, whether that's behavioral. So it's like a full-on CEO.
Wow.
And with executive dysfunction, you guessed it, the CEO is dysfunctional.
We had technical problems, guys. So if there's a bit of an abrupt change, that's because that.
talking about dysfunctional, right?
Very much. It was on brand, very much
Yeah,
so.
absolutely.
But we left it off with Cherry talking about the CEO being dysfunctional. So I think it kind of ties us in with just talking about our experiences. And yeah, I've had a lot of them. I got myself into some very difficult situations when it comes to spending and finances. And I actually, about 2 years ago, had to basically sign it's called an IVA, and it's a voluntary
Same.
agreement. Did you? IVA twins? It's really
Yeah.
not. It's really actually not. It's quite serious.
Yeah,
But
it
still,
is.
I would say though, doing that was hands down the best thing I
Yeah.
did, because I'm not allowed to get credit cards, which has helped. I've got to wait 5 years for that to clear, and it actually stopped me from being really silly. And I had to do that, because if I hadn't, I would not be able to pay off what I had accrued in debt, basically.
And I have to be full on honest. Whilst I did start going through the IVA process in true ADHD manner, never fully followed through.
Oh no.
But on the plus side, it enabled us to have a good overview of all the debts that we had
Yes.
collected. And we were able to get in touch with every single person or every single company that we owed money to,
Yeah.
and negotiate something with them. And at that point,
Yes.
our financial situation started to slowly improve as well. So it just kind of like went hand in hand, and eventually we luckily, I mean, touch wood, knock on wood, we didn't have to follow through the IVA, but actually starting the process, I highly recommend it. Like if you have so many like different debts, or you don't even know where to start, you don't even know who you owe how much, then definitely.
Oh, it's a game changer for me. I mean, I was really nervous when I did it, but I'm glad I did. And I feel like that's why I'm okay with money now, because that stopped me from being so careless. And it was carelessness, and a bit of depression mixed in there, a bit of impulsivity. And it would be like not huge purchases, but loads and loads of small ones, and just things that I didn't need. And I was obviously searching for something and filling a void as well, and that spending became quite an issue. But it also got to the point where it was like, just have to move my headphone then. That felt really strange. I just had a moment of like pure sensory difficulties. I've always had this problem with, like, if I go into a shop, I feel like I have to spend money, and I don't know why. And I feel like if I leave without something, I'm disappointed, because it's that dopamine chasing and that reward system. But it's also things that aren't necessarily me being careless or impulsive. It's just me not having that part of the brain that focuses on the small details. So, for instance, I always buy the wrong size tomato ketchup every single time. I always accidentally get the mini one. And you'd think by now that I would learn to just look. But even if I do look, I don't understand the measurements of stuff. So again, I will just end up buying little and often, which causes me to spend more money. I find it difficult to like gain a grasp of what I need in the grocery shopping.
Oh my
So
God,
I always overbuy, and then I have loads of stuff that just goes moldy in the fridge, and I'm like, why? Like, why do I do that to myself? And I feel like that again, it's just shame. It's shame on top of shame of all the things that we do, like not opening bills. And it's not even because I'm like scared of the amount anymore. It's just because I just don't want to deal with it. And again, then I'll forget about it, even though I've got the money now to spend to pay on my bills. I just forget, and I just think, oh, I'll do that later. I'll remember that. Of course I'm not going to. Of course I'm not going to. And it trickles and builds up. And it causes at the end of the month, I'm like, where did all my money go? What have I actually spent that on?
Yeah, I can definitely relate. And you know what, when you just talked about the bills, and you just sent me in a quick little panic, because I realized
no.
that, you know, we recently started all over. we threw away all of the unopened letters because we were like, do you know what? I have no idea what letter is even from when. Like, we had this massive pile of unopened letters.
Yeah.
Because there's like a real internal block for me, like, and actually for my partner, who's also got ADHD, by the way, to open letters, because we know that 9 times out of 10 there will be something, like some kind of document to deal with. Yes. Where you need to take some form of action. And I have this real block when it comes to dealing with documents and actually filling in forms or sending something off or whatever, or making phone calls. Actually, I hate that.
Yes. The worst.
Exactly. So I dread it. And so recently we threw all the letters away, and they just started to pile up again. And I'm like, oh no. I just realized they just started to pile up again. But yes, that's actually the thing that we struggle with the very most is unopened letters, and then therefore late payment fees.
Oh gosh,
and eventually court warnings. I mean, to be completely unfiltered, we've also had some debt collectors show up before. Which, you know, for a long time, every time the door knocked, I had this like little like internal like panic.
Yeah,
you know?
That makes me just, the thought of that is, it's really unsettling.
Yeah. So, but we are in a much better place now.
Yeah.
Now, and I think that kind of comes back to really knowing our brains much more, and actually like, you know, finding out more about how ADHD impacts us and trying to find ways on how to work with that. And I think that's, you know, so many people will ask me a lot of the times, what does having a diagnosis actually change? And honestly, it's changed my life so much for the better. And not just mine, my partner's life as well, and other people's lives who found out that they had ADHD, because you learn to, one, let go of the guilt and shame. And yes, that's a process, and it's a bumpy road.
But you do it. You can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then too, you start to try and figure out little ways of what might actually work for your brain, rather than the strategies that you try to use for your brain but weren't made for your brain.
Yes, accommodating yourself because you finally know how to, or you figure out how to along the way. And that's exactly the same. I mean, I'm in a much better position now financially, and I find that because I am earning money and doing okay, I'm not wanting to spend it as much. I am finding now, I think a lot of what my problems came from as well was a scarcity mindset, a little bit of, I didn't really ever have much and I wanted stuff, and I kind of spent to make myself feel better. And now I feel more secure. I don't necessarily need to do that as much. So it's less intimidating.
Yeah. I can relate to that. And I think probably a lot of the listeners will be able to relate to that as well.
Yes.
And I've also actually found having different ways of gaining dopamine as well throughout the day has been really helpful with my impulsive spending. But I've also used some other strategies that we'll talk about in a bit. But I also wanted to add, actually, saying, you know, we were talking a little bit about the impulsive purchases as part of the ADHD tax, and obviously, you know, late payment fees, etc. Actually, some of my impulsivity also ended up with me quitting jobs impulsively.
Oh yeah, me too.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. Some of those, or most of those, I felt ecstatic.
Yes, like the best feeling in the world. I get it.
But I'd quit a job without having a backup plan. And I know my dad, he'd be like, oh no, how could you? But I actually, And
but do you always make it work?
Absolutely. I've always made it work one way or another. And I've always been glad things went the way it went. But it was also, it did cause me a lot of additional stress
Oh gosh, yeah.
and financial issues that probably could have been avoided if I'd, not been a little bit less impulsive. And same actually with impulsive holidays and travels. I mean,
Yes.
I
I feel like
impulsively
we're the
went to
same person.
Australia.
To Australia. Do you know what though? I bet you've got the best memories from doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where I met my partner. So,
Oh no, it's meant to be. I
and
I
then
got so excited then. That's like you were meant. Like I truly think sometimes our impulsiveness is what makes our life so amazing.
yeah.
Sometimes, to be
So,
honest.
so just on a little positive note, I mean, yes, there's a lot of like obviously negatives, and I think that's often what is difficult to kind of ignore or work around the impulsivity is because a lot of the times our impulsivity stems from some form of excitement. And
Yes, yeah,
therefore, actually, whenever I follow my impulsivity, I feel the happiest. I feel super
yeah.
free, the worries and the struggles come after.
Oh
Like,
yeah, like we'll worry about them down the road.
exactly. Future me can deal
Yes.
with that.
I hate when I do that. I always do that. I go, oh, that's for future me. And then future me's like, damn it. Like, why? Why do I do that? But you know
Yes.
what? I think it's also, we're intuitive people. And sometimes we know when something's good for us, even if everyone else is like, that's a stupid idea. I think we act what our hearts tells us to do. And I've done that with jobs where I
Yeah.
literally walked out of a job. I just didn't go back and I didn't even
Yeah.
communicate it. I was like, they were just so mean. They weren't
Mhm.
nice people. And I was like,
Mhm.
why am I
Good for
here? Why
you.
do I have to do that? And that led
Absolutely.
me to like moving to a different city with no
Mhm.
job lined up, and then finding a really great job, meeting some of the people that I would class as friends for life,
Mhm.
and then just where I am now essentially in
Yeah.
life. So yes, okay, impulsive decisions and ADHD tax can
Mhm.
be quite a detrimental part, but sometimes it does work out and you've
Yeah.
got to trust your gut.
I absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's kind of also sometimes just something to be aware of is often when we do follow impulsive decision, we will have to probably overcompensate for those later down the
Yeah.
line.
Oh yes, there will be consequences.
But it's not always for the worse. Sometimes it's actually for the better, and it works out better. I mean, I also moved pretty much impulsively to the UK to
Yeah.
live with my partner from Germany. So, and I started a new degree here after I impulsively also left my old university degree in Germany.
And
It's
do you know what? That's so funny though, because I love this that you've just had these like little like jumps into new directions. But I've, just knowing you for the short time that I have, you're flourishing and you're blooming and you're finding. I don't know. It's nice to
Thank
see, and I
you.
think I'm really complimenting you tonight. I've complimented your
Yeah.
eyes, and now I'm like, but I just think
Aw.
you've got to balance the positives with the negatives, and I think it's
Exactly.
important to talk about and show our lives are actually quite good
Yeah.
now and we've done the work, and I think it's just
Exactly.
nice to mention that.
Life does get better, but it
Yes,
takes a
that's
lot of
it.
work. It's not a thing that happens from, within a few
No,
minutes, within 24 hours, not even within a week, a month.
no. And it
Sometimes
can backtrack,
yeah,
you know
absolutely. Like,
so it's
and
just one of those things.
it's still progress. Even if it feels like you're going backwards, it's still progress at the end of the day.
Exactly.
It's just,
I think we just need to say that because
yeah,
we both all we want to do on this podcast is make you feel less alone and supported. And yes, it's important to talk about these negative things, but we just really want you to be happy. That is like the main thing that
yeah,
everyone wants. And I
and
think
feel
it's
a
just
bit
sometimes
less
just remind
alone.
you, yeah, like you can have a good life. You really can. And
Exactly.
it might not feel
We
like that
believe
right
in
now.
you.
We do. And I will make your life good. Okay. So
You do that,
aggressive.
Emma. Love that little
So
aggression there.
aggressive. Right. Before I
So,
get too aggressive, why don't we talk about some of the strategies that
yes,
we do that helps? Would you like to go first, Cherry?
absolutely. And I think we kind of touched upon that a little bit already, is if you've got like yourself in deep debts, definitely do, contact someone who helps out with debts. There's some really great companies who will do it for free. So, there's nothing to be ashamed of. Many
Yes.
people are in that situation, especially in the cost of living crisis. And honestly, it will take an immense weight off of your shoulders. But if you're not quite
Yes.
at that stage, or if you're trying to avoid to get to that stage, something that has been helping me consistently is I used to be, or at times still am, but it's much better, a quite impulsive shopper on Amazon.
Yes.
Amazon packages, they show up and
All
often,
the time.
and often I'll be like, oh, what did I even order? Well,
Ah,
like literally I'll be like, but then I feel a little bit ashamed because I'm like, I've ordered something and I have no idea what it is.
yes.
But
Oh gosh.
basically, some way that I work with that and around that is to actually get myself into decision paralysis. So
Yeah.
I'll think about something. Let's say you impulsively really, really want, I don't know, a new camera, right? Let's say a new camera. Think about first, Google, like if you go on Amazon, then you'll find all the different new cameras, right? But then actually look through all the different options that are there, and I trust you.
Do you know what?
I will
Yes.
promise you that you will end up in decision paralysis because it's so many options. And
Yeah.
then please do also do a deep dive on Google on what are the best options.
Just
And look at
overwhelm
reviews.
yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or one of like my really like favorites is I used to go on Facebook Marketplace and then look for the same thing on Facebook Marketplace. So if it's something that I'm really set on, look for it secondhand to try and save yourself a little bit of
Yes.
money. Like this, again, no shame in it. Absolutely none.
My neighbour does that a lot, and she always gets
Absolutely.
really good deals.
Absolutely. And sometimes that will mean waiting a little bit, but that's okay. If you can.
Yeah.
If you can't, right, try and figure out what times of the day you spend most of the times impulsive shopping or any sort of impulsive things that end up in costing you a lot of money, and then have
Yeah.
an app blocker for those times.
Oh, yes.
Exactly. So, because then you can't use it. But if there's really something that you need to buy, it can wait until the next day where the app isn't blocked anymore at a different time,
Yes.
do you know?
That's a really good idea.
And what about your strategies?
Well, I was just so I was literally thinking like, right, that's what I'm going to do tomorrow. So for me, what's really helped is I have an app about I changed my bank. So I have
Mhm.
2 bank accounts, and the one is essentially just for spending at this point, but also it's with a bank called Starling, and they are an
Mhm.
online bank.
Mhm.
And they give you a little note. Every time you spend, it pops up with how much you spent and where you spent it. And the same as if you get money in, it will show you. And
Mhm.
just that alone helps me so much because I
Mhm.
have a visual of what I've spent. So
Mhm.
I'm really bad for just spending £10 here and there
Mhm.
and not calculating that in my bank and just thinking that I'll still have the same amount. So for me, that's been like, it enables me to look and go, oh, I've spent £50 today. I do not need to spend any more. Whereas beforehand, I just use my card and that would be out of my awareness and I wouldn't really necessarily calculate that. So it keeps me in check, and it
Mhm.
also has a really good breakdown of where you're spending your money, and you can kind of look at that and think, I'm spending way too much on food. Why am I doing that? I don't need that much.
Mhm.
Or I've spent a lot on Amazon packages.
Mhm.
And it kind of enables me to have a little bit of a reality check sometimes and just think, chill out, like stop spending money.
Yeah.
So that's helped a lot. Also, it sounds really cliche and obvious, but write a list before you go into a
Mhm.
shop, because it's such a, oh well, yeah, of course, but no, for a lot of us we forget. But
Yeah. And
genuinely,
actually
if I
use
have a
the
list,
list.
yes, and I like to actually tick it off, even if it's on my
Mhm.
phone. I will manually tick it off because it gives me little
Mhm.
like dopamine boost, and it gives me that the reward of,
Yeah.
and if I can stick to only what's on my list, I make it a challenge for myself, because that is another way that my brain works well, is if I compete with myself essentially. Probably not
Yes, I
that healthy
love a
all the time,
challenge.
but yeah, me too. I love a challenge. So if I can stick to what's on my list, I can then buy myself one nice treat. Instead of loading loads of rubbish that I don't need, I can get one nice thing that I truly feel like I deserve.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps me, like, I'm still getting that dopamine boost, but I'm not just chaotically getting it from everywhere, here, there, and everywhere. Those are the two things for me that I would 100% say have helped me to rein it in a lot
Mm-hmm.
and not be so like frivolous with money and just chucking it about as if I've got like millions in the bank. I genuinely don't know why I always have lived like that. Like my granddad used to say, you live like a king when you're a pauper, which means that you're a poor person. I was like, Jeffrey, quite rude, but it was true.
We've
rest in
literally,
peace, Jeffrey.
my partner and I, we've said so many times in the past that we live way above our means.
Way above, honestly. My friends
We
even said it
eat
to me once. They were like,
so
yes.
much, honestly. Like, oh, but I've just done another meal subscription. It's literally arrived today. So we'll see how that is going to
Nice.
work out. But you know,
That's another good tip as well, because I used to, I did used to have one where I was subscribed, but then most of the people in my household are very choosy with what they eat. So it actually just made it really annoying, because I was like, I love all these ingredients and these meals and nobody else did. And I was like, what's the point, man?
See, we just let them go off. So that was our issue, and we ended up getting takeaways too. But
same. Oh my god!
But
we have the best intentions, but it's
we
just...
do, and that was actually like one of the things that was mentioned as like a symptom of ADHD tax is the intention and action gap. So you have the best intentions of, for example, I don't know, let's say getting your car MOT'd, but then the action to follow through is missing, and then therefore you end up, for example, with your car being clamped. True story, by the way.
Oh god. Oh no. It's so easy for that to happen. I feel like that's such a good point to make, is we often, it's not like we forget. I often don't forget. I just get so overwhelmed by the process that I need to do that thing that I put it off, and then I'm just like, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, to come back to some strategies as well, what I found really, really helpful in the past is, because I'll generally forget what meals or what ingredients I have in the fridge or in the freezer, I've started taking pictures of everything that I buy.
Yes,
so I actually go through it, because like everything that's in the back of the fridge would often go off, or in the freezer, like in the bottom of the freezer, I'd be like, oh, I didn't know we had that.
Like 5 years ago.
Literally. So that's another way that I try and kind of avoid like double purchases or anything like that. And then the next one is a really good advice, and I think that's how we'll talk a little bit about what maybe some of our audience has sent to us, because we've asked you guys to send us about your difficulties, your struggles, etc. with ADHD tax, your experiences, but also your strategies.
Yes.
And something that was recommended, and I really like it, is actually saving, basically making sure you kind of get like long-term rewards. So that's something to work towards, because long-term rewards, or like rewards in the past, delayed rewards, they don't tend to work very well for us. But if you make it visual, for example, with like actual stickers, ticks off, or actually like paying yourself for each task that you do. So let's say there is a dreaded task and you pay yourself a £5, and you want to treat yourself for something that costs £30, you have to do 5 dreaded tasks.
I like that though. Like it's again, that's a reward system, isn't it? Of like, I don't know.
And actually like having a little bit of instant gratification of like, oh yeah, you've earned another £5, and actually yes, you've done the dreaded task, and then you have the delayed gratification as well of actually getting a bigger treat.
That's the thing I struggle with, is the delayed gratification part of it's like the same with exercising. If I've done workouts and I look in the mirror, I'm like, can't see a bum yet, still look the same as I did before. I'm like, of course I would. And it's like I need to get past that of expecting things to just be there and sometimes we need those little rewards to help us get to the big, better one.
With exercises, I do have I have got some good tips, by the way.
Oh,
the main
we
one.
need to do one on that as well.
or just consistency in general, like routines, maybe routine structure.
Because I say everything's my worst trait. Like I literally everything. I'm like, that's the worst thing. I'm like, I think it all is, but I had some really I asked people what they kind of struggled with the most with regards to finances, and someone said about budgeting, and that the fact that budgeting just feels so overwhelming, so that they just don't even do it. And I'm like, oh my God, I relate to that so much. Like, numbers in my brain don't really make sense. I do sometimes. I'm pretty convinced that I have dyscalculia or dyscalculia. Because I can't physically do the maths, even if it's very simple. So it feels really hard to do that, which is why, as I went back to my tip, the app that I use for my banking helps so much, because it just gives you a visual to work with. But I totally relate to that of the budgeting. It's almost like you just let it go out the window because you're like, well, I can't save. So
there's one, someone had sent me actually exactly for that a message. They said they
Really?
struggled so much with it that they set up a different, a separate bank account where they paid themselves a specific allowance and that was the bank account they were able to use throughout that month.
That's what I do as well. I get anything that's extra goes in there, and it's money to just go and spend if I need or if I want. I think that's a really good idea to do if you can. It keeps the one bank for just your bills, so you know that money is accounted for and everything gets paid, kind of thing.
Yeah. And otherwise, a lot of the people had also messaged me that they also struggled with throwing out food that had gone off, impulsively quitting jobs without having backup options, which, I can relate to. And having just a lot of kind of late payment fees, parking fines, etc. And a lot of clothes as well that they didn't return, which, I've also got actually a pair of shoes that didn't fit me, and
just chilling now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
they still have the tag on, but I obviously won't sell them on Vinted either, because I know myself, I won't go to the post, because otherwise, I could have just sent them away, sent them back in the first place.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, it's such I just find everything so tedious sometimes. Like, it's just like, I don't want to go to the post office, because half the time they're really miserable in the post office as well. That's another thing that they really scare me. Like, not all post office staff are, of course, but the ones that I have come across, they scare me.
Bless you.
I've had a lot of people say as well that the reason they struggle is they don't know what to buy to cook, and therefore spend a lot of their money on takeaways. 100% me. I was known by my neighbour before we became friends as the takeaway girl, because I would literally order one pretty much when it was just me and my now 5-year-old. At one point, me and Milo just lived on our own here, and obviously when he went to bed, I would just order takeaways, and it got to the point where it was like, how am I even affording to do this? Like, I didn't know how I did that.
I feel like we could very well do a full-on episode on anything kind of health, fitness, diet related thing.
Oh,
like
100%.
Kind of a wellness episode.
Yes, we should. And I feel like that would be something that so many people would get out of, because there's so many levels of it as well. But I mean, for me, that's what I'm looking through the answers is everyone's saying about the impulse spending and girl math of ADHD maths of just not being able to understand money. That's me.
Yeah.
And I feel like, it's really hard to say when people are struggling with it. I know that they'll listen to this and they'll think, well, I can't do anything about that. I promise that if you find the things that work for you and you accommodate yourself, you can start to slowly reel it in and get a bit better quality of life.
And there's no shame in getting help. We've also finally got ourselves an accountant, and it was well needed. Needed.
Oh my gosh. I mean, when
there's still a big tax bill to come in.
Yeah. Oh, I had to do a tax return about a year ago. I tell you now that I've never felt so sick ever doing something, and it was fine. I didn't end up owing anything. Everything was all
Mhm.
good. But the stress of doing that was
Mm.
very
Mhm.
unsettling. And I think another thing is, like, with ADHD, we tend to just put things off until the
Mm.
last minute and make it worse for ourselves. Sometimes you've just got to bite the bullet, crack on with it, get it done, and you will feel better.
So
And
much
that's coming from
better.
someone who is a very bad procrastinator. But money is something that you don't want to let it get out of control, because that is going to impact your well-being in your life.
Yeah.
And I just think hopefully some of these tools will help the audience and anyone who's listening to this thinking, I'm never going to get out of this. I really want you to believe that you can.
Yes.
And it's just finding the right support.
Absolutely. And there are people, professional ones, and also people who you trust. They can also support you, even just mentally, body doubling through getting some important documents, just let them sit with you through a cup of tea.
Yeah. Do you know
can
what?
do
That
this.
makes me think we should at one point go live and do a body doubling where we sit there, we get our stuff done, and it's an opportunity for you guys listening to do what you need to do, and we can all talk about it afterwards.
Definitely.
Give little high fives.
Yes.
I think that it's time to wrap up today's episode, because we are at this point probably just getting delusional, if I'm honest, after being mums for the day. And I think that's another thing actually of being parents with this, just before I finish, is you feel so much guilt if you've spent too much, and you feel like you're not
the
being
amount
a
of
good
toys
parent.
as
And
well that I buy.
Oh, I do
Sorry.
it too, because I like giving
I know we're about to
things.
wrap up.
I know.
I'm
Don't know why I
just
do
throwing
this every
something
single.
else.
I just want to talk to people. But yeah, I
Well, it's
feel
been
like that's
lush,
something we can talk
honestly.
about
Yeah,
deeper. It's been a
absolutely.
pleasure. I love it,
And I'm really looking forward to our next episode as well.
Me too. I'm really hoping that who's listening to this, enjoying listening, and you're noticing that we're getting into the flow of things a little bit better. And yeah, it's been a pleasure so far, and I hope that we get to continue with you listening down the line.
Yeah.